I'm Dr. John Gartner,
And I'm Dr. Harry Segal.
and welcome to another session of Shrinking Trump.
We've been meeting every week for 2 months now, maybe even more than that, maybe almost 3, because John and I were concerned as clinical psychologists with the ways in which the culture, the public, and the media didn't seem to be understanding what they were seeing in the behavior, actions, and language of Donald Trump. We saw, and for a long time, a severe personality disorder, what's also known as malignant narcissism, which causes someone to care only about himself and also to act against others without compassion, empathy, and also to behave in criminal or amoral ways, including pathological lying. But what John noticed in the last few years, and I saw as well, is that we saw incipient signs of early onset dementia in Trump. That is, we began to see linguistic abnormalities, strange gait, other signs that he was starting to become cognitively dysfunctional. At the same time, we were concerned that the media, the public, and the culture was seeing Biden as somehow too old and aging in such a way that he was dysfunctional, an idea that was being pushed by Trump and the Republican Party and partisans. And so John and I were making the argument that in the case of Trump, we had a dementing brain, and in the case of Biden, we had a normally aging brain. And then a few terrible things happened, and which I called traumatic in the last few weeks. First of all, Biden, who had done almost no press conferences in nearly a year and had very few personal appearances, in part because the world has been at war and he's been working very hard. But no one had seen him functioning in public. And then the debate came. And in the debate, he really seemed to collapse cognitively. Now, John and I were very concerned about that, as everyone was, because it was a shock. It's what I call a trauma. That is when a reality that we all depend upon is suddenly turned upside down by a surprise, by violence, by the drastically unexpected. But we urged calm. We are psychologists, not politicians. We may have political views, but we're really talking about what we observe as clinicians. And with the help of a guest that week, Professor Dunning, we took a deep breath and we said, we need to see more data. Well, over the past few weeks, Biden has been making appearances every day, almost every day, 20,000 people, 20 appearances. And actually, he has been showing high levels of cognitive functioning, albeit he, as someone who has suffered from a stutter his whole life, we had a terrific guest last week explaining that. Biden, and Biden is 81, so he seems more feeble if you look at him, and he speaks sometimes with a halting quality sometimes, although he's always done that. But we saw a resurgent Biden. We saw a normally aging Biden with cognitive strength, no slippage. We saw him interviewed. We saw him at a press conference. We've seen him at rallies. But as I began in this long intro, the culture doesn't just misunderstand aging. Our culture hates aging. We have a bias against the elderly. We have a bias against the idea of aging. John and I are getting on in years, but we take pride in the fact that we don't necessarily look our age. That's something that people will always thank you for. Thanks for saying I don't look my age. We're not a culture that admires the elderly. We're not a culture that reveres their wisdom. And I believe it's because we fear death. We are a young adolescent culture. We believe in youth and vigor, even if it's phony and manipulated and involves dyeing your hair and spraying your skin. So we've had a week where we have seen, as clinicians, the high functioning aging Biden that we decided, looking at the data points, that he was, but we're also seeing a collapse in support. He's contracted COVID. We are filming on Thursday evening Eastern time, and we have no idea what the political landscape will look like tomorrow or Saturday. But it looks as though Biden is now considering stepping down after having been beseeched by Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries. I'm not going into the politics right now. That's just my long introduction to say that this has been a week of trauma following the debate. And then, of course, there was Saturday afternoon when a very young man, bullied throughout his high school years, working as a nutritional aide, took an AR-15, one of the many guns owned by his family, and took a shot which nearly killed the president. And that is itself a trauma. I may not vote for Donald Trump or think that he is at all a positive force in politics in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want to live in a country where people running for president are murdered, because that leads to chaos and military takeovers. So that's the week. We're going to talk more about the trauma over the assassination. We have Justin Frank is here, who you've seen before, who is going to talk about the likely impact of the assassination attempt on Trump. And we want you to know that we are turning our attention. We've never taken our attention away from Trump and his pathology, but we are turning back to it. And so, John, any thoughts about what I said, and where would you like to take us next?
Well, I'd like to talk about both things. First of all, what you said about our culture not revering age, in fact, being afraid of it or repulsed by it, terrified by the idea of death. You know, other cultures do revere their elders. I was telling Harry that, look, as far as morality is concerned, I try to at least keep the 10 Commandments. I feel like, that's like the if I can just stay away from, those major sins, maybe I'll be okay. and one of the things in the 10 Commandments is honor your mother and father. The idea being that we should honor our elders rather than devalue them. And I think that we have seen Biden be a victim of ageism. I think he's been devalued because of his signs of being elderly. I think he's also been misunderstood. I thought our guest last week, Eric Jackson, was brilliant, and he's a stuttering specialist. In fact, his research area is the variations in people's stuttering. And what he has noticed is that as Biden has aged, his ability to compensate for his stutter has gone down. And so as a result, his speech is more halting. And most of the errors that he made in the debate probably could be attributed to stuttering. Unfortunately, Biden has not, he's come out as someone who had a stutter, but they have never really defined his halting speech as being related to stuttering. And so the public is making their own conclusions. And this comes to the issue of how electable he is. They're seeing the halting speech. They're seeing the quiet voice. They're seeing the slower motion, the slower physical motions, and they're coming to a conclusion that he's not able. Harry and I have come to the conclusion that that is not correct. We did give ourselves some time, and people were angry at us about this, that we didn't just say it was a gimme that Biden was fine. We actually wanted to hear what the informants had to say. We had to look at the evidence. It felt like there was new evidence that was emerging. As Harry said, he hasn't been doing a lot of appearances, so there's this quality of a reveal or a surprise. But in the end, we really had a lot of tape we were going to show you today that we cut it, truncated it. But I just want you to know it was tape of Biden doing great. Biden doing great at press conferences, at a press conference, a long press conference, doing great at NATO with international leaders. And I'm sorry, we cut a piece of tape from his Michigan rally where he really finally did what we told him to do, which is to really go after Trump and attack him. And he did a really great job of that.
But, you just to interrupt, you could see, though, this cultural bias when you look at, and we'll show you one clip of it, which is the reporters at that press conference. Hey, President Biden, it's a very demanding job now that you're going to bed early. No, I'm serious. And Lester Holt, who I think really did a despicable job in his interview. Hi, Mr. President. How are you doing? This is how people talk to the elderly. This is how they talk to them.
And I think what's really quite unfortunate is Biden was bouncing back, and I think he was accumulating some momentum. He was having one good public appearance after another, and then the attack happened. And I really think the attack has changed the dynamic quite a bit. Harry talked about a trauma in terms of seeing someone attacked. I think there's been also another trauma that he has been so, and we're going to be talking with Dr. Frank about this. We wanted to have Dr. Frank on the show because he is an expert on Trump psychology, but surviving the attack reinforces, I think, his paranoia, that he is being attacked, that he's under attack. It reinforces his grandiosity, that somehow he's so triumphant that even death can't, take him, that he, this kind of cartoonish image of him being this mythic figure is kind of reinforced. And it reinforced his mythology among his followers. And it re-energized his base. The next day, Elon Musk, endorsed him, pledged $45 million a week or a month for his campaign. And so I think one of the traumas that Democrats experienced was the trauma of all of a sudden Trump looking inevitable and empowered and almost divinely appointed with this, life-saving miracle.
But what we have to remember, and unfortunately, I don't think the Democratic leadership is thinking about this, which is we're living in an intense media environment, so that the feeling or idea of the moment is so compelling and feels so real until the following week and the week after that. We don't know what's going to happen at this election in November. We don't. But what it felt like was, oh my God, he survived. And not only did he survive an assassination attempt, but listen, if I were shot in the ear at a rally, I'd stay on the ground. This guy in 2 seconds puts his fist up. I mean, it's so part of him. It's so instinctual. His notion of creating that image that he didn't even need to think about it. He just did it.
Yeah. In 2 seconds, he realized that he had public relations gold. With the flag in the background, the bloody ear, the fist raised in defiance, saying "fight, fight, fight." It was masterful the way he took advantage of this. I mean, incredible stroke of luck that he wasn't killed, and stroke of luck that he was given this stage to enact his mythology on.
Right. And of course, at the moment, he didn't know if there were more shooters. I mean, it was just really foolhardy and absolutely brilliant. I mean, that photograph guarantees him a place in history.
Yeah, it's an iconic photograph. It is an iconic photograph. It will be seen, decades from now. So I just picked two pieces of film. So now to talk about the convention, I just picked two very brief pieces of film. So we're talking about, how robust Trump is, right? And how he's overcome death and how so let's get a picture of Trump. Now, by the way, some people are going to be listening and they're not going to be seeing the image. So for those people who are going to be listening on the podcast, you're going to hear some MSNBC reporters talking about things that have nothing to do with anything that is on the screen. But on the screen, those of you who are watching on YouTube, what you will see is Donald Trump sleeping at the convention. So can we see
Ever
that?
since he got here, he hasn't done anything for the people who he wrote this moving book about in terms of his own background. I mean, that's very hard to run from. That's going to stick to him, I think.
Here's something that Ohio Senator, now VP candidate, wrote in 2016 when he was comparing Donald Trump to Hitler.
So for those of you, again, who couldn't watch, he was dead asleep during all that time that they were talking about something completely irrelevant. And by the way, he fell asleep again the next night while Don Jr. was talking. So not only is he not this robust figure, but
wait a minute. That's reasonable. He must have thought he was in court. Actually, that's the thing.
That's what I mean. I'm saying, this person who, these are signs of dementia. People who fall asleep involuntarily all the time, right? And he fell asleep. He didn't just fall asleep at his trial, which never, almost ever happens. He fell asleep most days at his trial. He was asleep more often than he was awake. Okay, so now so far we've had 2 nights at the convention. He's slept at both of them.
Okay, I get it.
Now, so Harry mentioned the, his brilliance at pulling his fist and pumping his fist and going fight, fight, fight. Chip, I'm going to ask you to, when you play this videotape, I'm going to ask you to actually play it twice because only 4 seconds long. But I want you to experience this Hitlerian moment. This is the new Heil Hitler. Okay, this is going to be the new symbol. Fight, 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 fight. That's going to be the new salute to the dear commander. So this is what we're dealing with a malignant narcissist, right? This is what we're dealing with a would-be dictator.
That would go well with a brown shirt, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, I always say red hats are the new brown shirts. The other thing that happened to the convention that is, I think, very serious is the anointing of JD Vance. I think this is actually a quite ominous development. Now, I'm not advocating any outcome or course of action, but just to do a thought experiment. Had Trump not turned his head and had he died that day at the rally, the MAGA movement would have been decapitated. I mean, who in the field of battle would have picked up the flag and continued the charge? Would it have been Ron White Boots DeSantis? Would it have been Little Marco? I don't think so. I don't think they have what it takes to be a dictator. I think JD Vance does. And so now I feel like the evil emperor has his Darth Vader. And I think one of the things that Darth Vader is going to do is to be the person who implements Project 2025. Trump just doesn't have the intellectual, heft, right, to really get into the details, even of his own evil plans, right? But JD Vance is extremely intelligent. He's extremely intelligent. Not just he went to Yale. I went to Princeton. Lots of people weren't that bright. I read his book. He's a good writer. He's a good communicator. He's a smart guy. And that's one of the things I think makes him very dangerous. He's also extremely extreme. And I think that in a way, Vance could be to Trump what Brigham Young was to Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith was the slightly crazy bipolar visionary, right? Who really is the heart of the founder of the Mormon religion. But then when Joseph Smith was murdered, he was broken out of jail and strung up by some people because I'm not going to get into all the details, but he was killed. And Brigham Young was his appointed successor, led the Great Migration to Utah, and really founded the Mormon community. Okay, this happens quite often with successful movements. Jesus had a St. Paul. That someone who is a more illuminated, kind of charismatic figure starts the movement, but someone who's a little more well organized and a little more competent is the person who actually executes the founding of it. I feel with Vance now, we have someone who really could be a MAGA successor. And so I think that's really quite frightening. I know you had some tape you wanted to show from Vance, and then later I do.
All right. Well, I was appalled at Vance's evolution because his book really was talking about his roots in Kentucky and the ways in which those people can be manipulated. He referred to Trump as the American Hitler, warned against him, saw his power and how he was reaching working poor Americans. And that's the background that JD Vance emerges from in a kind of spectacular way. In some ways, he's a kind of Republican Bill Clinton. He sort of comes out of poverty and then is elevated through his intelligence and his education, but with a very different trajectory, of course. And I've heard him look straight in the camera and diminish January 6th as being just, not a big deal, and saying he would have done what Pence wouldn't do. So I found him to be very dangerous and very effective. But then I watched his speech last night. He doesn't give a very good speech. He's not bad. And there's something a bit vulnerable about him when he's giving a speech. He's not a professional politician. He's just gotten into this, a year and a half, like a year ago. He's been in the Senate for like a minute or two, and now he's vice president, vice presidential candidate. So I took an unusual part of the speech just for us to think about who is this person. So Chip, why don't you roll that? Let's take a look at it.
And let me illustrate this with a story, if I may. I'm, of course, married to the daughter of South Asian immigrants to this country. Incredible people. People who genuinely have enriched this country in so many ways. And, of course, I'm biased because I love my wife and her family, but it's true. Now, when I proposed to my wife, we were in law school, and I said, honey, I come with $120,000 worth of law school debt and a cemetery plot on a mountainside in eastern Kentucky. And I guess standing here tonight, it's just gotten weirder and weirder, honey. But that's what she was getting. Now, that cemetery plot in eastern Kentucky is near my family's ancestral home. And like a lot of people, we came from the mountains of Appalachia into the factories of Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Now, that's Kentucky coal country, one of the 10... Now, it's one of the 10 poorest counties in the entire United States of America. They're very hardworking people, and they're very good people. They're the kind of people who would give you the shirt off their back even if they can't afford enough to eat. And our media calls them privileged and looks down on them. But they love this country, not only because it's a good idea, but because in their bones they know that this is their home, and it will be their children's home, and they would die fighting to protect it. That is the source of America's greatness. As a United States Senator, I get to represent millions of people in the great state of Ohio with similar stories, and it is the great honor of my life. Now, in that cemetery, there are people who were born around the time of the Civil War. And if, as I hope, my wife and I are eventually laid to rest there, and our kids follow us, there will be 7 generations just in that small mountain cemetery plot in eastern Kentucky. 7 generations of people who have fought for this country, who have built this country, who have made things in this country, and who would fight and die to protect this country if they...
I find that very interesting. I'll tell you why. It's so specific. It's a graveyard that he hopes he and his wife will be buried in, and his children will be buried in. He's idealizing this community as somehow being the backbone of America. He is, and he's pitting it against the hordes and millions of people from insane asylums and prisons that are pouring over the border and destroying America.
I'm actually not sure why you find that so peculiar, though, because I think he's telling exactly the story that the working class white voters, and he even names the states in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, want to hear. He's from coal country. He's from Appalachia. So in some ways, I think what he's doing is extremely politically clever. And I think the image of the graveyard makes it very specific. He's a writer. And writers understand that actually specific details actually communicate a feeling much better. So the graveyard in Kentucky, of course, it's also a dog whistle to the Civil War. But it's a shout out to his people. So I think it was very politically clever and also very politically dangerous, because those are that's the base that they're trying to arouse. Now, if did you have more you wanted to say about that, or can I go to the...
I just think he was very uncomfortable.
Oh, he looked pretty. I actually don't agree. I think he actually I think he seemed kind of slick. But
Okay.
here's the thing. Here's why I think he's so dangerous. Aside from what we just said, that he's slick, that he can, he knows how to tell a good story, and he appeals to the white electorate. He's very extreme, but also he has a capacity to make the most extreme MAGA policies sound normal, to normalize them. So let's just hear a quick example.
Is successfully dealing with the left-wing domination of universities is Viktor Orban's approach in Hungary. I think his way has to be the model for us, not to eliminate universities, but to give the choice between survival or taking a much less biased approach to teaching. He seized control of state universities and put them in foundations that were then run by his allies. Is that what you're advocating be done in the United States?
Well, Margaret, what you're seeing in the United States actually is that universities are controlled by left-wing foundations. They're not controlled by the American taxpayer, and yet the American taxpayer is sending hundreds of billions of dollars to these universities every single year.
I don't want taxpayers controlling education necessarily. Is that what you're advocating for, federal government?
Margaret, what I'm advocating for is for taxpayers to have a say in how their money is spent. Universities are part of a social contract in this country. They educate our children. They produce important intellectual property. They get a lot of money because of it. But if they're not educating our children well, and they're layering the next generation down in mountains of student debt, then they're not meeting their end of the bargain. I think it's totally reasonable to say there needs to be a political solution to that problem.
So it really sounds totally reasonable to adopt the Viktor Orban plan, where we basically take control of all the universities, put them under the control of some kind of foundation, and we're not looking to close the universities. Not only to close the universities, we're not being crazy here. We're just looking to for the taxpayer. Because after all, for the taxpayer to have control over what their children are being taught. Doesn't the taxpayer have a right for that? And so he makes the most repressive, sort of, fascistic. I mean, you're a professor, Harry. When is Cornell going to start getting strong armed? Like, hey, if you want that federal money, you better tell that shrinking Trump guy to buzz off. So, and by the way, I would have liked to show more, but we have a lot of tape today. But he has said that if he were vice president, he would not have certified Biden's win. So if they become president, if Trump wins, okay, and he becomes vice president, and he, let's say, runs for president in 2028 and loses, is he going to certify his loss the way Al Gore did, when he's already signaled in advance that he wouldn't have done it last time? And are we even going to get to have a fair election? Or by then, will they have taken control of the software? What Sidney Powell tried to do in an amateurish way, then they'll be able to do it in a more systemic way. And the other thing about him is that, and by the way, we talk about him implementing Project 2025. Okay, he's getting into the weeds. He realized that, that abortion pill, we should use the Comstock Act to keep pharmacies from being able to receive the abortion pill in the mail. He's already finding ways to dig down into the details, right, and really take away our rights in every way, shape, and form. And finally, JD Vance is a traitor to the United States of America. He is a Russian asset. And it's not just me who thinks that. It's Russia that thinks that. Could we see the Lavrov cover, please? Russian foreign minister praises JD Vance. It is clear that Vance has become a fan favorite at the Russian foreign ministry. Now, can we see the quote? This is Lavrov speaking. He's praising Vance, saying he's in favor of peace. He's in favor of ending assistance that's being provided to Ukraine. And we can only welcome that because that's what we need to stop pumping Ukraine full of weapons, and then the war will end. That's right. Then the war will end because we will have lost and Putin will have won. Okay, this is someone who isn't just an isolationist. He is a traitor to the United States of America. He is in league with our enemy. And if they're elected, Ukraine will fall. NATO will be standing naked without any American assistance. He's already said, I don't care about Ukraine. And Trump has already said, Putin can do whatever he wants. Well, if Putin can do whatever he wants, he's not going to stop at Ukraine. The other thing that is a little bit ominous is we're noticing that institutions are starting to bend themselves in advance to Trump's will. There's actually a term for this in democracy experts called submission in advance. Anticipating the pressure that they might experience, they're already starting to change their DNA or change their rules or change the way they do things. So, for example, we know that Trump had been banned from Facebook for all of his misinformation and racism and incitements to violence on January 6th. He was reinstated, but with some strict controls. Well, of course, he didn't like that. So recently, he threatened to have Mark Zuckerberg arrested and prosecuted should he become president. Let's see that cover. Donald Trump threatens to send Mark Zuckerberg to prison if he is elected. Let's see the quote. Writing on his social media platform, Truth Social, on Tuesday, the former president said that if he's elected in November, quote, election fraudsters will be imprisoned. The Post name-checked the Meta CEO. They have no shame. All I can say is that if I'm elected president, we will pursue election fraudsters at all levels, never seen before, and they will be sent to prison for long periods of time, Trump wrote. We already know who you are, all caps. Don't do it, Zuckerbergs. Zuckerbucks. Oh, Zuckerbucks. Be careful, he added. Okay. So, of course, Mark Zuckerberg's not going to be intimidated and fall for that kind of armed fascistic attempt to control social media, right?
Not the guy with that backbone. No way.
Yeah, exactly. Now, that article that I just read to you, I think it was July 8th. Now, 2 days later, on July 10th, we have this article. Meta rolls back restrictions on Trump's social media accounts. Wow. Think of the coincidence. Meta executive Nick Clegg says company has, quote, responsibility to allow political expression. Well, I'm glad that they've discovered their sense of responsibility. Yeah. Can we see the quote? Meta announced Friday it's rolling back heightened restrictions on former President Donald Trump's social media accounts, an effort to give the Republican presidential contender more leeway to share content in a heated campaign season. The social media giant said it's loosening the more rigorous consequences for Trump if he breaks their content rules, such as those that bar hate speech, incitement to violence, and voter suppression. The heightened penalties facing Trump's accounts were introduced following his 2-year suspension from Facebook and Instagram. So another profile in cowardice. We're going to be seeing a lot of those if Trump wins, or if he continues to look as if he has the appearance of winning. That you're going to see this kind of basically capitulation. So. We were going to show you more of Biden bouncing back, but we still wanted to show you a few of the highlights.
Sense of debate. The press and their good guys and women up there, they've been hammering me. I make a lot of mistakes. They've been hammering me because I sometimes confuse names. I say that's Charlie instead of Bill. But guess what? Donald Trump has gotten a free pass. He hadn't done a damn thing till a couple of days ago. He'd ride around his golf cart in his course, filling out his scorecard before he picks up his club. Rambling about. Think what he's been talking about. Yeah. Hannibal Lecter. He says he's a nice guy. Trump would rather be electrocuted than eaten by a shark. That whole thing, remember that? Poor Donald. He can't even watch TV this week because it's Shark Week. By the way, on a more serious note, I had 32 members mostly from Europe, but 32 members of NATO in Washington. And by the way, and the press has covered this, they give me credit for strengthening NATO, expanding NATO, making it what it is. This is deadly earnest. And that butcher, Putin, who I know and have known for a long time, when he invaded Ukraine, here's what Trump said. I'm not making this up either. He called him a genius and said it was wonderful. What the hell is going on? But people would rather talk about how I mix up names. I guess they don't remember that Trump called Nikki Haley Nancy Pelosi. Oh, no. No more. Donald, no more free passes. Today we're going to shine a spotlight on Donald Trump. We're going to do what the press so far hasn't. I think they're going to soon. We're going to say who he is, what he intends to do. Folks, Donald Trump is a convicted criminal. He was convicted by a jury of his peers of 34 felonies for paying hush money to a porn star and hiding from voters in 2016. Donald Trump was found liable for sexual assault by a judge who told us not to be fooled by Trump's brushing it off. Here's what the judge wrote, quote, the judge in that case wrote, Mr. Trump attempt to minimize sexual abuse, finding it frivolous. Mr. Trump raped her. It's the judge's line, not mine. Raped her. As many people understand the word rape. Folks, Donald Trump is a business fraud. He lost his license to do business in New York State. Been fined over $400 million for reading false information to banks. And he's still facing charge for mishandling classified information, which is a criminal offense. He's still facing charge of his role in January 6th trying to overthrow the outcome of the 2020 election. He's still facing charges in Georgia for election interference. Remember his phone call? I just need 11,780 votes. Maybe another president done any of that. Look, if you want to know how bad a businessman Trump really is, just think about this. He inherited millions of dollars only to squander it. He's filed bankruptcy 6 times. He even went bankrupt running a casino. I didn't think that was possible. Doesn't the House always win in a casino? Most importantly, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, Trump is a threat to this nation. He led a violent mob on January 6th to overturn the 2020 election. Hold on to power. The election I won by 7 million votes. By the way, he made these claims about stealing the election. Guess what? What happened was?
So, Harry, I know you had picked a couple of moments from the press conference that you wanted to show.
Yeah, I feel like we're giving Biden the respect that he's due, not only for all he's done, but also because he had demonstrated to us and people who I think watch and think in clinically sophisticated ways that he wasn't suffering from dementia. He is actually functioning rather well, but that's not going to change the narrative. But let's take a look at it. This is from the press conference that went on for an hour after the NATO summit ended. And this first question from Felicia Schwartz.
Felicia Schwartz, Financial Times.
Thank you, Mr. President. Presidency is the most straining job in the world, and it's 24/7. How can you say you'll be up for that next year, in 2 years, in 4 years, given the limits you've acknowledged that you have today?
The limits I've acknowledged I have?
There's been reporting that you've acknowledged that you need to go to bed earlier and your evening around 8.
That's not true. Look, what I said was, instead of my every day starting at 7 and going to bed at midnight, it'd be smarter for me to pace myself a little more. And I said, for example, the 8, 7, 6 stuff, instead of starting a fundraiser at 9 o'clock, start at 8 o'clock. People get to go home by 10 o'clock. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about, and if you looked at my schedule since I made that stupid mistake in the campaign, in the debate, I mean, my schedule has been full bore. I've done, where's Trump been? Riding around in his golf cart, filling out his scorecard before he hits the ball? I mean, look, he's done virtually nothing. And I have, I don't know how many, don't hold me to it, roughly 20 major events. Some with thousands of people showing up. And so I just think it's better. I always have an inclination, whether I was playing sports or doing politics, just to keep going, not stop. I just got to just pace myself a little more. Pace myself. And the next debate, I'm not going to be traveling into 15 time zones a week before. Anyway, that's what it was about. That's what it was about. And by the way, even with that, I love my staff, but they add things all the time. At the very end, I'm catching hell from my wife for that. Anyway,
I really like that. I think he handled that rather well. Did you hear the condescension in the very young reporter's question? I know it's very taxing for you. You know, Mr. President, you are, after all, no longer human, but an old person. And I thought that
people need to talk slowly to us, right? They need to, so we understand.
Right. It's like you're, a child. It's very strange how we treat old people like children. Chip, let's go on to the next one. Now, let me just set this up. David Sanger of the New York Times, who's a very serious reporter, he's been around for many years, and he asked Biden a question about China and China's relationship with Russia and their aggressive behavior. And we're only showing you maybe 2 minutes of what turned out to be a 15-minute reply. And foreign policy experts have marveled at how Biden handled such a complex question. And he digresses in beautiful ways because he's elaborating ideas. And I wish we could show all of it to you, but we're just going to show you a little bit.
Thank you, Mr. President.
be nice, David.
Mr. President, the NATO declaration that was issued yesterday was very notable because it described China as a decisive enabler of the war in Ukraine for its provision of critical goods to the Russians. That's part of a broader partnership that seems to have cemented in place in the past 2 or 3 years. I think one that you were a little bit doubtful of when we asked you about it some time ago. So I'd be interested to know whether you have a strategy now of trying to interrupt the partnership between China and Russia, and whether or not in a second term you would pursue that, if you could describe that strategy to us. And along the way, could you also tell us whether you think, just to follow up on Felicia's question, that if you were in a room with Vladimir Putin again, the way you were 3 years ago, or with President Xi, that a few years from now you will be able to go negotiate with them, handle them one-on-one?
Well, the first part of the question is, we discussed and I raised in the NATO summit and others raised the future of China's involvement, what they're going to do, what they're doing with Russia in terms of accommodating, facilitating. They're getting access to additional. They're not supplying weapons themselves. They're supplying mechanisms for them to be able to get weapons. And China's position is basically, and I've spent more time with Xi Jinping than any world leader has, over 90 hours since being vice president all the way through, for real. And by the way, I handed all my notes. But my point is that Xi believes that China is a large enough market that they can entice any country, including European countries, to invest there in return for commitments from Europe to do A, B, C, or D, or not to do certain things.
Listen, we think of this as an example of Biden, of what he can do. Imagine how fluent he was. And we don't have more to show you, really, particularly since this may be the last week we talk about him as a candidate. We'll see what he chooses to do and how much pressure he's under. But John and I stand by our clinical view. This is not a political view, but a clinical one, that this is a man who is in charge of his faculties.
Yeah. Thank you, Harry. So we're going to switch over to talking to our guest, Dr. Justin Frank. He was a very popular guest when we had him here last time. We got lots of comments on our YouTube channel. Please have him back. And Dr. Frank is the author of a psychobiography of Trump called Trump on the Couch. So he's deeply, deeply inside of Trump's head. And the reason we wanted to have him here today is because this amazing event of this survived assassination, this mythic event, we really wanted to help have Dr. Frank have you here. And by the way, let me also mention that you're a clinical professor at George Washington University Medical School in psychiatry. Forgot to add that to your biography. But how is Donald Trump processing what happened to him, and how are his followers processing it?
Well, it's really a couple of thoughts quickly. One is that you really did analyze it very clearly in the beginning of your program tonight, where you said that his recovery reinforces his grandiosity, that he can survive anything, and he can. And to me, his unconscious grandiosity is not unconscious, but it's the driving factors of it are unconscious. But basically, he said he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and go up in the polls. Well, now he can be shot and go up in the polls. He is grandiose to an incredible degree. It's compensatory, but he's so used to it that he's able to channel it and reclaim it whenever he feels like it. So that's why it was so easy for him to, raise his fist. And it was just his ability to do that. It's quite remarkable and very quick, and begrudgingly admirable. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that I was interested in the gauze he wore on his ear and why he did that, because there's a picture of him on Sunday playing golf. An extensive picture, several pictures. He's not wearing any gauze on either ear. So he put it on for the convention. He didn't need it. So it's like, kind of look at me. I'm a wounded warrior. I'm a hero who has survived an assassination attempt, and I'm coming here to speak to you.
And Justin, some of his followers are starting to wear the bandage on
That's
their
the
ear.
next thing I was going to say.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
That's fine. Don't be sorry. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, eventually there's like the gauze. I mean, there must be a run on gauze in Milwaukee. I don't know if the pharmacies have enough gauze to go around. I mean, I hope nobody gets a real injury and needs it. But it's really amazing. And they're all little cartoons. One person I loved was, it was pretty funny, was they made the gauze into a hood, like a Ku Klux Klan hood, cut it. And I mean, there was a thing on Instagram or whatever. It was very funny. Somebody did with two.
It reminds me of Stephen Crane's Red Badge of Courage, right? This is his Red Badge of Courage. What you're saying is, because he's such a fraudster, what you're saying is it's more like the person who comes into the courtroom for the case about his injury with a fake collar on.
That's right. Now, I read the Red Badge of Courage recently, about 2 years ago, and I can't even remember what he had the courage because he survived.
Well, the injury was the Red Badge of Courage. That's the point. The injury was proved you were a man.
And it gave him strength. And for Trump, what gave him strength is something very different. What gave him strength was the narcissistic injury of never being loved as a child and being abandoned in some ways by his mother emotionally, which I write about in the book, and then watching his brother getting beaten up by his father and always being afraid to confront his father. So his courage is manufactured and has become very effective. What is striking to me, and I'm just rambling a little bit here about the assassination, is I don't understand. Is there a link between this assassination attempt and this incredible rush of the Democrats to replace Biden?
Well, I think there was. I think there was in a way. Yeah, I think there was.
Curious about that.
Yeah, no, it is a curious phenomenon because
started before the assassination.
Of course,
no question about it. People started talking about it,
right?
And MSNBC and the New York Times and all these people were talking about it. And I had some friends who were psychiatrists, good friends, colleagues who were talking about it with whom I disagreed. And the discussion became that they felt he wouldn't be electable. And that was the issue, not that he couldn't do his job. If he were elected, he would be fine for the next 4 years, even though he's old. He's fine. But he was not able to deal with that bombardment of blitzkrieg being yelled at by Trump. And it really knocked him off his game. And I don't know anybody who could survive a blitzkrieg like that. It was a verbal blitzkrieg, I mean, Hitler took over Belgium in one day. It took over France in one day. So this guy took over Biden in 90 minutes. I mean, I understand that. But it was temporary. And some of the people in Europe who read the debate and didn't get to hear it felt that Trump was lying the whole time and that Biden, without seeing the debate, seemed okay. And in fact, he made good points towards the end. But I don't want to get into that as much as
there was a psychological process. I mean, aside from whatever the poll numbers say, this whole process of that looks as if it's going to be Biden being extruded was a psychological process. The Democrats had a panic attack. I think they had a panic attack, and a panic attack is a psychological phenomenon. Okay. And while they were having a panic attack, then suddenly the specter of Trump rises as this mythic, powerful, God that you cannot kill. And I think it struck terror into the hearts of the Democrats, like when David came across Goliath, and Goliath comes out and he's so huge, and suddenly he looks so big, and Biden looks so free, and then Biden gets COVID, for God's sake.
I cannot add to what you said. I really do think that makes so much sense, and I agree with it. And I think that that the timing of this assassination attempt was perfect for Trump. And I really wanted to say something.
Well, I just want to say quickly that I think the political class is remembering Reagan being shot, because Reagan was not doing very well with Congress and his program. In fact, the economy was in recession. And his being shot and surviving that boosted him, elevated him. And I think Democrats were afraid that was going to happen this time. What people were forgetting is people don't like Trump. They might be impressed by his bravado, but outside his base, he's not really agreeable. We didn't see a huge shift in the polls this week after that.
I think what people are, the people you're talking about who are forgetting that are the Democratic leaders. I don't think people who don't like Trump suddenly like him. People don't like him. I've had patients even talk to me and say, I'm really afraid to say this, Dr. Frank, but I'm sorry the guy missed. And then holds her hand over their head. I think, you could tell me anything. That's how we work.
I'm glad you said that, Dr. Frank. I've had a lot of patients say that too.
I don't know. It was
Me too.
so wild,
Right.
So,
this is the unmentionable, but people can say the unmentionable in therapy, and they have, and they are. But it's a normal human. It's a normal human feeling.
But can I also add? One of the great discoveries of not just of Freud, but the people who followed, is that we have multiple thoughts and feelings at the same time, and they're often in conflict.
Absolutely.
So I really dreaded the idea of anyone being assassinated during a campaign. I just hate it. I think it would be terrible. Do I also have a part of me that goes, boy, would life be different if that had happened? Of course I do.
The great defender who got rid of the death penalty, the contested at Clarence Darrow in the 20s and 30s. He made this comment, which I always have liked, which is, he says, I've never killed anybody myself, but I must admit there's sometimes I enjoy reading the obituaries. And I really think, I think that has happened to a lot of people since Trump was shot at. But so I do think there are feelings that people have about it. I do think the idea of him bouncing back and raising his fist and then wearing his badge of honor and the gauze and everything. Even one time there was a picture of him yesterday. He had it on the wrong ear. And then they must have changed, but it was so weird. I hope that picture is captured somewhere. He had it on his other ear.
You can't make this stuff up. You just can't make this stuff up.
Just everything about him is a lie. Everything about him is a lie. Everything. There was one other aspect.
And then I have a friend who sent me a picture of Vincent van Gogh, with Trump's face and the ear. And I thought, people, that's carrying things too far, because Vincent did it to himself. But still, or I think he did it to himself. But anyway, whatever it is, it's very dangerous to have violence. And what you were saying earlier about having more than one thought, one of the things that's really important, that is something I work on very much with people who are afraid to share their thoughts, is that there's such a thing in our culture where people say, tell me how you really feel. As if when they say that, they have confused the concept of really with the concept of only.
Well, Dr. Frank, I wanted
to really feel something that's genuine, and you really feel it, but it doesn't mean it's your only feeling.
Right.
And I think that too many people confuse that. Tell me how you really feel. Well, at this moment, I really feel this. And then at that moment, I really feel that. Does that mean I'm crazy? No, it means I have more than one feeling about something.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about the attack is how this may reinforce Trump's paranoia and the paranoia of his movement. They already seem to be saying, see, this just proves they're out to get us. And but also, one of the things that you said on the show last time that really stuck out for me was Harry and I had been talking about Trump, and you said, look, I agree with everything you guys said, but I don't think you're emphasizing enough his lust for conflict and how much he's energized by conflict and hatred and destruction.
Yep.
And so even though
It's a
people are saying,
turn on.
hey,
It's a total turn on.
it's a turn on for him. And so I speculate that this attack is going to actually cause him to raise the temperature. Temporarily, they're lowering it and trying to be, unifiers, but they can't really do it. They're trying to give a message of unity, but they're not capable of it. They can't sustain it for more than a few moments. But that, in fact, it will feed the political violence. Because he's been calling for political violence all along. He suggested a Second Amendment solution for Hillary Clinton way back. He said, I'll pay the bills of anybody who beats up a protester at my rally. He's been inciting violence all along, but we know that as a malignant narcissist, he likes to strike back 1,000 times harder. So now, isn't this going to just well up large amounts of murderous hatred inside of him that he will have to then lash out on people with?
It wells up, but what the issue is, though, is that he's always been comfortable as a hater, but what's happened now is that he can even justify being a hater. Right. So, as you said, it wells up hatred. He now can justify it. It's like somebody who now can say, well, look at what you did to me. Right. This is terrible what happened. And I am right to do this. It's not just revenge. I mean, it's a way of reinforcing his lack of a superego. It's a way of triumphing over any sense of conscience, because now he's even more justified in being cruel and destructive.
Great to see you. Yeah, thanks for coming.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks again. Appreciate it. Well, so a lot of Sturm und Drang, but you talked at the beginning, Harry, about what the purpose of our show is: to educate people about Trump's dangerous psychopathology and cognitive decline. Now, one of the problems with doing a show like this, right, is that pretty much everyone who's listening agrees with us, right? It's like my following on Twitter. It's like, it really doesn't matter how many impressions I get. I'm just getting retweets of people who agree with me. So the question is, how do we get this message, right, about Trump's dangerous mental illness to the people? Well, there is now a solution that I'm happy to tell you about. George Conway has founded a political action committee focused on educating America about Donald Trump's dangerous unfitness. It's called the Anti-Psychopac. There it is on the screen. There's the website. It's psychopac.org. And I would encourage you to make a contribution. What I was going to say about this Psychopac is that what's unique about it is it goes not just in the social media bubble that we're in, where we're talking to people we agree with. It's jumping over the heads of the mainstream media who refuse to report the story of Trump's mental illness.
Most importantly, they have not yet done it.
They have not yet done it. And in fact, one of the things that Marty Barron, the former editor of the Washington Post, wrote about this in his memoir. I remember during the Trump presidency that I was interviewed 3 times by the Washington Post for a story about Trump's mental state, Trump's mental health. And 3 times the writer had to call me back and say the editor, Marty Barron, had spiked the story after it was written. Okay, he writes about spiking the story in his memoir, and he said because talking about the mental health of politicians, he said in quotes, is the last taboo.
And just to interrupt, John has worked so hard at trying to get this story through the mainstream media networks, et cetera. And John, you've always said to me that producers are interested, and then suddenly the story gets killed. And right. If you remember, we showed you a clip of Nancy Pelosi a few weeks ago, actually quoting mental health professionals saying that Trump has dementia. I'm sure Nancy wasn't watching us, but these people have staff and they watch everything. And it was starting to get through at that level We are not seeing it in the press. It's perfectly fine to talk about Biden as slipping and having dementia. But talking about Trump's mental illness has been a kind of ceiling that no one can pierce. And we've been trying to do that in this show earnestly and honestly. And John is really about to talk even more about this attempt by George Conway to really break through.
Right. Because what George Conway is going to be doing with this PAC is having roadside stands, signboards on the highway and billboards on the highway, which all drivers see, right? Not just the people in our bubble, but all drivers who drive in those states. And he's going to be doing paid advertisements, as well as obviously unearned media by going on different shows, et cetera. So we actually want to show you, it's about 3.5 minutes long, the announcement video for the Psycho PAC that George just released today. The PAC, this is Thursday. The PAC actually began today. Today is the launch date. So, Chip, can we see that inaugural video?
Hi, I'm George Conway. This is the most important election of our lifetimes, and I'm sorry to say the most important issue in that election isn't being addressed. Donald Trump has never been right in the head. We've all seen videos of Trump slurring words.
Really anomalous.
And then they announced there was no buys, no.
A beautiful criminal United States.
And rambling nonsensically about sharks and electrocution.
You know what I'd do if there was a shark? Or you get electrocuted? I'll take electrocution every single time.
Hannibal Lecter.
The late, great Hannibal Lecter. He's a wonderful man.
Donald Trump's problem is he's just nuts. I'll let others who know him explain.
He's a populist authoritarian narcissist.
He is a consummate narcissist.
Governor Chris Sununu called Trump crazy, but
adding, I don't think he's so crazy he should be in a mental institution, but if he were in one, he ain't getting out.
And he goes and he starts to say these wacky things. That's what scares everybody about him.
Our country can't be a therapy session for a troubled man like this.
John Kelly sought guidance from a book in which 27 mental health professionals warned that Donald Trump was psychologically unfit.
This man is a pathological liar, a narcissist at a level I don't think this country's ever seen.
Trump is not simply eccentric or odd in a good way. He's unwell, mentally unwell, in a dangerous way. He is indeed a pathological narcissist on a level we have never before seen. He's a malignant narcissist who is also a sociopath or psychopath. What these terms mean is that Trump is a man who cares about nothing but himself. Not you, not the country, not the laws and constitution that a president swears to faithfully execute. And it also means that Trump is a pathological liar and that he lacks any moral conscience or capacity for remorse. These are the psychological characteristics of dangerous cult leaders and dictators. They shouldn't be the traits of an American president. Now, you haven't heard any of this discussed very much in the media. And that's because too many people are afraid of talking about mental health issues, particularly Donald Trump's. And that's the problem we're here to address. To understand Donald Trump, why he's unfit for office, and why he's a danger to the republic, you have to understand his psychological disorders. Trump's malignant narcissism explains everything about him. It explains his pathological lying.
It's a rigged election. It's the only way we're going to lose.
His misogyny.
Grab him by the pussy.
His racism.
You had very fine people.
Jews will not replace us!
On both sides.
His authoritarianism. His endless quests for vengeance. His love for dictators. It may even explain his recent praise of Hannibal Lecter. It certainly accounts for his criminality. 4 indictments on 88 counts in 4 courts, and a conviction in one of those courts on 34 counts. 34. All of this is why I'm pleased to announce the formation of the Anti-Psychopath Political Action Committee, or Anti-Psycho PAC for short. I'm putting my own money behind this PAC. $343,434.34 to be exact, and we'll be raising a lot more. We're going to use those resources to educate the American public about Trump's psychological unfitness for office. With the help of mental health professionals, we're going to explain how his condition poses a grave danger to our country. We hope you join us. Join us in learning about the dangers of Donald Trump's derangement. Join us in spreading the word. Join us by contributing, to pick a number, $34, or less if you like, or more if you can. Join us and spread the word. This country is too wonderful and important to be turned back over to a madman. Learn more at psychopac.org.
Man, that's powerful.
We couldn't say it better ourselves.
I'm just so excited about this because one of the things I think so many of us have been feeling is a sense of impotence and helplessness, right?
Yes.
But watching all this going on and understanding it, it almost makes you feel like a Cassandra because you understand what's going on, but you don't feel like you can influence it. I feel like with George's PAC, with the anti-psycho PAC, now there's something we can do that can actually get this message about Trump's dangerous psychopathology to the people. So I'm very grateful to George for organizing this and for funding it with some of his own money and for really getting out there in front of the public and making this happen. So I'm just going to urge all of you to support it and tease our next show in which our guest is going to be George Conway. And he'll be able to tell us about his PAC in person.
Excellent.
So, Harry, time for the shrink wrap section of our show. What have we learned today?
I just want to sigh, right? It's been so much. I think I'm going to go back to just 2 quick points, or maybe slow points. One is that we have been experiencing trauma after trauma as a nation, but also for people who are politically engaged. We've seen the crashing of a president in debate that made us think that he wasn't fit. We saw a resurgence of this president performing well, but we see panic spreading across the political class and among the media. We've exposed a real bias against the aged and a condescension towards Biden, which I think has been uncalled for by people who interviewed him. And then we had the trauma of an assassination attempt. And I think that when people experience trauma, and in this case, turbulence plus trauma, right? Rapid changing every day. We didn't even mention the court cases or the nomination of JD Vance as something that came right after an assassination attempt. And I want to just tell everyone, step back and take a deep breath. What we can do best is to think openly, listen to our feelings, but also consider the voices, the possibilities. If Biden does step down from the race, we have to listen and be engaged in how he'll be replaced. And we have to keep in mind and keep remembering that the person he's running against is clinically disturbed in numerous ways and is growing more powerful, at least as of today.
And if Biden does leave the race, some people have been angry that we've spent so much time talking about Biden's cognitive functioning when this show is called Shrinking Trump. Some people said, "Oh, maybe you should change the name of the show, or shut up." But we felt we had to deal with it. Obviously, if he does leave the race, then we will go back to our exclusive focus on shrinking Trump, because he'll be the only person whose mental and cognitive health is an issue in this campaign.
Yes.
And now that George Conway has joined, with his PAC, it gives me hope. It gives me hope that we will get this message to the low information swing voters in swing states, because somehow, Harry, deep in their soul, they know he's nuts.
Well put, John. So next week we're going to have George Conway, who really is an extraordinary person. I can't wait to have him on. And you can find us just by searching for Shrinking Trump, and you can find us on YouTube or also on Spotify. And we tend to drop our shows on Friday afternoon, but we hope you'll tell your friends, and we also hope that that you'll come back. Hope to see you again.